Hey YouTube, it's Dimitri, and today I'm going to answer a subscriber's question, and one that's kind of thrown me for a loop. And also, I'm going to tie this into a nonsensical article as I'm seeing here on compensation, salary, transparencies, and this is all going to tie together. Just give me a second with this. But the question is going to be, could you please explain to me some of the barriers that you face in order to reach your career goal? So I don't know if I've ever reached my career goal. And to be honest with you, my career goal is somewhat flexible and fluid because at the very beginning, I thought I wanted to be, I don't know, the head of one of these banks that's going to help organize it and run it. And there's still a piece of me that wants to do that. And the more I've gotten into the quant side, the more I've realized quants aren't treated very well in banks. Specifically, they might be treated better. Again, I don't really know here, but on the trading side, but we're typically viewed as those that just generate models and just like go away and do stuff. And so part of my goal, I guess, career-wise, is to be able to create a nice, loving quant community where we're actually accepted by, the industry and by banks, the finance industry as a whole, and people actually understand what we really do here. Because there's always this bleed over of finance people thinking they're quants, and then they diminish the trade into nonsensical Excel sheets with formulas, which is not quant finance. I don't know a quant out there that actually does quant work that's like, yay, I'm real excited to use Excel. Like, we all have to use Excel for business people because they want the charts to look a specific way, and it has to have the right formatting, and it has to look like Excel, or you have to put it into Excel so they can actually manipulate things and test it and look at it. It's a pain in the backside. And no, quants don't use Excel because Excel's dumb and it takes too long to use things. And yes, I used to work in corporate finance. I have used Excel for actual Excel purposes where it shined, where it was amazing. I would never use, for example, R or Python or SAS or anything to do corporate finance because it's far easier to manipulate and use Excel for traditional finance, and specifically like corporate finance, accounting, management and financials in that sense. But goal-wise, my goals kind of shifted around, right? It's trying to find a happy medium. I mean, I love doing quant research. I love building models. I love getting my hands dirty in coding. And then on the same time, I've realized the further up the chain you go, the further you get pulled away from this. But I'm now taking this as my responsibility, based on my goals here, I guess, to actually make a better environment and an easier career path for those below me. So that kind of ties into the barriers here of A, getting to where I'm at, but also how do I remove those barriers for the people below me? And the barriers themselves, they're a challenge. It's hard to think about what I would define as a barrier here. So starting on this a little bit here, one of the barriers is going to be the fact that the country you live and work in. So I talk about this quite a bit. People are convinced if I give you the quant education somehow, so I magically give it to you, or I create all these courses and you learn quant finance, you're going to be able to work in a third world country and you're going to be able to make amazing models that work and function just like the models in America or Europe or other well-developed markets like Hong Kong, for example. And you're going to be able to add all this value. Well, models don't work a lot of times if they don't have nice structure around the data to help keep the systems functioning and operating. And this is why well-developed countries work well. We have so much regulation that often the models are built around regulatory requirements. Again, regulations actually help us make data that's good quality here, and it's required. When you're in a third world country, though, often you don't have those regulations. You don't have kind of that structuring and that framework in place. Now, if you want to look at this from the trading side here, I mean, imagine you could lie, cheat, and steal, and you could trade I don't know, stocks or bonds or some sort of assets, not on exchanges that are not monitored, that don't have a lot of insights. You can't actually see into the markets and what's going on here. So more like, dark pools somewhat. But imagine they're unregulated and people are just buying and selling on thousands of exchanges that are private exchanges. Maybe it's like on eBay, we're buying and selling stocks now. These sorts of things, it's hard to see all the data. It's hard to get the data. A lot of the methodologies, the modeling processes aren't going to work in this sort of scenario here. So one of the big barriers, I think, for a lot of quants is trying to figure out how do you get to the market that you're wanting to go in. And even for myself, coming from the United States, I lived in Washington State, which is in the northwest corner of the US. There's no financial markets anywhere near us. So Seattle, Washington is probably the biggest. There's not really a quant market there. You're going to have to go to like Chicago or New York or Dallas or like Raleigh, North Carolina. You can do wealth management, for example, like in LA or San Francisco area in California. But there's not a lot in the middle here. And so getting to those markets is really important. And for me, one of the big barriers is how do I get an education close to one of those markets? How do I get an education that's good enough that people recognize it? So my undergrad is a generic state school. It was very cheap compared to going to like a fancy private school or, going to, I don't know, some big fancy state school like University of Michigan where I did my graduate degree, which was far more expensive. But that's the first barrier. And how do you actually get over that? You got to work towards it. And that's kind of I think the challenge for a lot of you coming from international as well, is how do you get the grades? How do you get the right education, right? I don't want to see like an English degree or philosophy degree coming into the quant master's degree. And getting through that master's is a gate. It's somewhat of a gatekeeper of getting quants in and out. It is needed. It is required educationally. So no, I don't think it's just like it's just keeping the wealthy in the industry. No, you really do need it. Even people with a master's that didn't do well in their programs often can't cut it in the industry because they just don't have the education. So getting to that, overcoming that barrier is challenging. As I mentioned, you have to do the best with what you have. So if you can get into one of the worst quant programs out there and that's all you can do, you're going to have to do that. Just go into that program and do as best as you can do in that program. And then you have to learn to write resumes. So another big hurdle and barrier for quants in general is writing the resume, right? Trying to figure out what people want. This sounds like, oh, it's so easy. I know I want to be a quant. And yet every resume I see has the same generic nonsensical stuff on it, like value at risk. I'm a risk manager. They have derivative pricing. They have Black-Scholes model. I mean, these are good, but I want to know like the nitty gritty details of like, have you done stationarity? Have you looked at model assumptions? Have you done linear regression? Again, if you did linear regression, what type of models did you build? The question that always kills everybody in interviews for me is, what was the hardest part of that project? Again, I want to know the nitty gritty details. These are barriers you have to overcome and learn. And me, unfortunately, I didn't take advantage of all the resources I had in graduate school. I was too embarrassed to do mock interviews. And so I didn't learn this until it was too late. I already interviewed at like 10, 15, 20 firms. And I failed all these interviews until I realized like, oh, they're going to want a little bit more substance. And they don't care that I've done 100 different skills. They only want these 5 skills. So just talk about these 5 skills. So getting over the resume barrier, getting over the interview barrier, that's a big challenge. That was a big learning curve for me. Again, tailor it just to what they want. They don't want to know that you can do everything under the sun. So for me, it's a massive turnoff when I see like, oh, I'm an expert on stochastic processes and stochastic calculus. And they go on and on and on and on about, pricing out derivative products or like, I don't know, Greeks or something. And I'm like, hey, I'm in a job that doesn't really use a lot of that. So I think that's great. And we can relate. I have a financial engineering background here, but I want to really talk to you about, credit modeling. Have you done like gradient boosting decision trees? And what are some issues you see with using them? Is overfitting a problem? How would you prevent that? Those sorts of things. I'm looking for, again, my tier here. So trying to overcome that barrier. Career-wise, though, I think the hardest thing in any career for anybody, the biggest barrier is going to be working with people and knowing when to leave a firm. And this ties into working with people here. So if you have a great manager, a great support system, they will help you grow as a person educationally and career-wise. They will try to be there for you. I'm trying to do this with my employees. It is extremely challenging. So it's not like you just, waltz out and like they give you everything. Trying to get them to develop and learn and grow as a person is really challenging because most people don't want to be a mentor or they're just not good mentors. Career-wise, I've learned a lot. So I've been, I guess, in many ways, I would say, I've been groomed somewhat. And not on purpose here, but every manager I've had, whether I've liked them, I've disliked them, I've struggled to work with them, and they were super easy to work with, I always try to learn about, okay, where are they coming from their perspective? My managers in general, almost all of them, have taught me how to work with more senior management and how to work with difficult people. So as a quant, you'll have to work with people that are non-quants, and explaining quant things to non-quants is very challenging. And even though it makes complete sense in your head, and all the quants are like, this makes complete sense, the business side obviously doesn't understand that because they don't have the background. So learning how to communicate with them, learning how to roll with the punches is something that's been a big hurdle, I think, for many in the management spectrum here. So quant-wise, on paper, it's black and white. This is right. This is wrong. That's how it is. And as a junior quant, you typically say, like, this makes complete sense. This is the right answer. Why are we not doing this? This is dumb. But you have to look at this from a management perspective a lot of times, and sometimes it rocks the boat too much. So example on this. Sometimes whole systems and teams are built already around some process, and it's a dumb process, and it makes no sense. and it's super inefficient. But to uproot the entire system and everybody involved and forcing them to change overnight isn't really feasible a lot of times, because you have to train everybody, you have to get them on board. Then there's rules and regulations. So typically you write processes and procedures in banks, which is looked at by our internal audit, for example, and regulators. And you have to train all the people on the new system. And so sometimes, so this is an example here, it's easier to roll over and say, okay, fine, we have this system. It's not great. It's nowhere near the right way to do this. But, I have all these other people that are on here. I can't train them overnight. I'm just going to have to roll over. And sometimes this happens with models as well. Statistically, it's right and it's wrong. There's been times when the model has had a small issue, doesn't really impact the output here. So you have to do the analytical work to see if it impacts it. And it doesn't really make a huge difference on it. And so, yes, I want them to fix it as a quant because it's wrong and it needs to be fixed. And my life needs to be complete order and black and white. And that's just how quant finance works, because a lot of it's math driven. But sometimes you have to realize the development team's going to cry and complain, or the validation team's going to cry and complain if you're on the other side. I've been on both sides of the coin. And sometimes you just have to roll with the punches and just go with it. I've luckily had a lot of really good managers over the years that have trained this into me and have helped me overcome this sort of barrier here. I think this is what stops most quants from becoming management, is trying to communicate, trying to learn when to roll over, when to kind of stand up and fight for this. There's not a right answer on everything. And so often you have to pick and choose and try to do the best you can. But watching managers from the outside, learning from their decisions and their mistakes, it kind of gets you into that mindset of how to get towards the management position here. So I've done quite well at getting over this barrier, but I've also seen it hold back a lot of people career-wise. And then finally here, I want to talk about something that's kind of frustrating me here. And it is a barrier for many in the industry, and it's hard to measure. And so it's hard to say it's really a problem or it's not really a problem, or how much of a problem is it. And this is going to be the whole discriminatory thing, equal pricing that we've been talking about and I've seen online, and people are griping and complaining. And, Colorado now mandates that they post the salary on the job. And New York's now, I think, now doing the same thing. And I am 100% against this. I think this is complete nonsense. So let's back this up statistically here. Let's look at this. So I don't have actual data here, but we're going to talk about this theoretically and see how this makes sense. And this goes for quant programs as well. I'm not happy with a few programs lately, some bigger names, but people get all up and excited about equality. And I don't want equality. I want diversity. You can't have your cake and eat it too. And so I'm going to give you guys some examples here. So let's talk about this for pay-wise. Let's say you have two quants, right? And they're both amazing people, and I like both of them. And this is kind of based off my real-world example. But you have one that works extremely hard and gets a ton of stuff done. And no matter what happens, I can dump anything on them as a manager, and it just gets done. I don't have to think about it. I don't really have to check their work, to be honest with you. I know it's going to be done. You have another person, they do the bare minimum. When I ask them to do stuff, they do it. But they don't really go above and beyond here, right? Now, how do you pay these two individuals? They have the same title. Let's say they have the same education, the same experience. Everything else is the exact same except for the work ethic here. How do you compensate that difference? People say, oh, well, you promote the good guy and you leave the other guy where he's at, and that makes up the difference. It's like, okay, that's fine. So now we start to think about the quant world, right? Imagine you have this quant and he can do all this work, and I've seen this. And he's doing the work of like 3 or 4 people. It's not fair, if you think about it. It's not fair for me to pay him the same as everybody else. He should be making significantly more. Now, HR and all these different firms and all these regulations are trying to make it so it's like, okay, well, this person can't make more than everybody else. But from a fairness and equality perspective, you're looking at it like, I mean, it's not really fair. So equality, when they talk about it in the media, it means that everybody makes the same amount, given the same skills, given all this stuff. That's not the real world, though, because no one's ever the same. Doesn't matter. If you're identical twins, you're not the same, right? Your work ethics are going to be different. Your interests are going to be different. Who you are as a person is going to be different. And so when you start thinking about this from a tech perspective, right? I complain about this for the quant side, but I know tech pays based on skills. So you could be like a programmer, for example, right? Or you could be a quant in finance, for example, like in a hedge fund. And if you're the best, hedge fund programmer, the best quant, or whatever you are, the best, software developer, you should be making what you're valued at, your real, honest, true worth. Now, when you come in and say, okay, I'm going to see data-wise, I'm going to see this one guy making a ton, I'm going to say, this makes no sense. Why is this guy making so much more? Why is this girl, or whoever it is, why are they making so much more than everybody else? And from a firm perspective, right, if I'm going to hire him and get him to come to my firm because I want that great talent on my team, I can't say, oh, I'm going to, pay him the same as everybody else because he's not worth the same as everybody else. And then the problem with the quant finance world and most jobs in general, they have this dumb tiering where you have levels. So I have an analyst position, an associate, a senior associate, a junior vice president, a vice president, senior vice president, associate director, director, managing director, for example, in finance. And the problem is this guy is an amazing individual contributor, and I can't pay him the same as a managing director, even though he should be paid at that salary. But I also can't make him a managing director because the responsibilities for a managing director are to manage teams, and that's not where he shines. And so you have this conundrum of how do you do this? And it's super frustrating. And so going into the quant world here, so going to free markets here a little bit in the US, if you think you're underpaid, and I've been at firms where I've thought I'm underpaid, I've interviewed at a bunch of other firms to figure out where the salary ranges are and found out I was underpaid. So I went and jumped to a different firm and they paid me more money. So you have that freedom to jump around. But again, firms should not be confined to paying specific amounts. They should not be confined to telling you exactly what every employee makes. This is nonsense, right? We want diversity. We want people to be different and unique. And different jobs require different skill sets. However, how hard it is to find different skill sets depends on the salary and how much you pay them. So this is basic supply and demand in economics here. And so if you have all-stars, I want to pay them like all-stars. And if you have average people, I want to pay them like average people. Different firms have different rates too, though. So going to a smaller firm typically pays less than going to a bigger firm. Again, it comes in with budgeting. It comes in with salaries. You shouldn't mandate every firm to pay the same amount. I think this is nonsense. Now, going for this on a discrimination standpoint here, right? People always say, okay, we want everybody to be proportional. We want everyone to be equal, which is never equal. The first mistake I consistently see is I always see, okay, you don't have, 50% of this people, 50% of that people. So let's look at race here. I always see people saying, oh, you need to have, equal parts of different groups. And I go, well, you realize in the population, for example, in the United States, and you could do this for any other country, you have to actually, if you're going to break it up by race or nationality, for example, you have to think about what's the prior distribution. So if your grouping makes up, say, 25%, you should only represent then, hypothetically, and in a purely equality, I'll put it in air quotes here, 25%. The issue, though, is that people say, no, it's not 25%. They get 50%. And you're like, why? And they go, well, there's two groups of people. Okay, one, there's more than two groups of people, and two, they don't make up 50%. People go, well, okay. So then they say, okay, Dimitri, you're right. Let's make everybody represent the percentage here. So, if you make 25% of the population, then you're required to have 25%. Okay, now gender comes into here. It's a kind of interesting point. The issue, too, is that different groups of people based on race, gender, nationality, all these different aspects here, maybe even education type, have different preferences, right? I mean, there are jobs that are just more women like to do because women typically like to take care of people. They're more empathetic. Men aren't as empathetic. Men like to look at things that tinker and move. And that's why more men are typically engineers. We like to fix things and, work on them. It's not alive. It has no emotion. It has no, I don't need empathy for this machine. I can be mad and bang the machine up and then, take it all apart and fix it. Women like to do things that work with more people, right? I mean, that's why women a lot of times make really good managers because they're empathetic. They can work with people. That's why they make great, school teachers and nurses. Now, that doesn't mean that all women should do one job. It just means preference-wise, when you look at these distributions, right? Let's say quant finance, for example. Here, I'll give you a real-world example. My channel, for example, is 90% men and about 10% women, right? It's just based on interest. Like, I'm not out there marketing. I don't even pay for marketing. So I don't market anything. I'm not targeting any group. It just happens to be that 90% are men, 10% are women. Now, when you look at quant finance programs, again, that are not trying to skew the numbers here, because now some of them are bragging they have 50% men, 50% women. I'll go into it in a second here. The issue is that there's just not that many women that are interested in quant finance, and there's more men that are interested in quant finance. Now, if you pick something else like being a teacher, for example, you might have, let's say, 70% maybe that are women that are interested in being a teacher and 30% that are men. It doesn't mean that we should basically say, okay, 50% has to be men and 50% has to be women. No, because again, going to that prior distribution, when you start digging deeper, you say, okay, the prior distribution is really 70-30. So if you're going to try to target something, which again, I think is nonsense, it needs to be 70-30. It can't be 50-50. I mean, that's just how it is. So now when firms implement these rules, this is where the problem comes in here. You say, okay, I'm going to have 50-50 guaranteed men versus women. The problem with this is now that there's not enough women, so all these different firms or all these educational institutions are fighting over women because in quant finance, for example, say 10% based on my YouTube numbers here. If they only make up 10%, we're all fighting to get women to get 10%. Now, if you were to rank order everybody based on some sort of, I don't know, eligibility ranking here, so let's say accepting them for grad school, I would want the best students at the top, the worst students at the bottom, and I, as a program, would want the top best students. So let's say I have a spot for 50 students. I want those 50 students that are the best. I don't care the gender. I just want the best students. Now, if every program's competing for that, right, they're going to get distributed across different programs. Now, if you say, for example, okay, 50% have to be men, 50% have to be women, so now I need 25 men, 25 women. Now, if there's just 90% men and 10% women, the women are going to be scattered probably randomly throughout the whole spectrum, meaning they're just as smart, they're just as qualified. But now the issue is for me to get 25, I'm going to have to pick a few from the top, and I'm going to be competing with all these other firms. I'm going to have to pull a bunch from the bottom now. So now my group's not as good as it could have been, right? So now you're struggling. Now, what if there's not enough women to go around all the programs? I mean, what do you do at that point? Now we're stuck because now there's all these men who wanted to do it, who are educated, who maybe had great GRE scores, GPAs, perfect schools. They were more than qualified to do it, but now I can't accept them. Now I got to find other people that aren't qualified or shouldn't have been accepted to these programs. So the whole equality thing, I think, it's frustrating and it's challenging because career-wise, now talking about barriers, I have seen discrimination in the quant finance industry. Again, it's hard to prove, right? So I might see something and say, oh, I think this seems like a discriminatory issue here, but it might not, right? There might be other factors I just don't see. So often it's a nationality issue, not a race issue or a gender issue in quant finance. Typically, right, Indians hire other Indians, Chinese hire other Chinese. There's rarely an American in the field. And then yet when you see, I don't know, even like, for example, myself, when you see me getting promoted, right, people are questioning, why is Dimitri getting promoted across all these organizations and why is he getting up through the ranks? Is it because he's American? Right? It's a valid question people are going to ask. And when people ask it, I'm not offended because, right, these are things we need to think about as a group. So again, how do you prove it? Doing numbers and saying, oh, this percentage and that percentage, I don't think that makes any sense. I am not for leveling the playing field in any way, shape, or form. So even as an American in quant finance, we make up a very, very small portion of the quant realm. Probably, I don't know, less than 10%, maybe 5%, maybe less than 5%. And do I think we should be encouraging getting all these Americans to come in to equal out the playing field? No, I don't think so. Again, it just doesn't make sense. We just want good quality people. And that comes into the whole diversity piece here. I've had colleagues with very unique educational backgrounds, not related to quant finance, extremely smart, have the skills required to do the job, and provide very unique, different perspectives that I would have never have seen or gotten without the diversity here. And I hope people can go on my YouTube channel, or you can go on like my website and look at my recommendations or reviews. I think that's what I have them labeled as. People have written reviews. My reviews come from all over the world because I don't consider race, I don't consider gender, I don't consider nationality. I'm just trying to provide help across the entire board. And I think this should go for hiring practices, for promotional practices. I think this should also go for educational practices. I don't want to see quotas. I do not want to see it. I think it's complete nonsense for the quant realm. I think it's nonsense in general. Again, if they're concerned with discriminatory practices, maybe they should look at their process for doing it and make it more transparent, which is what I'm trying to do with the quant finance rankings here. And I'm actually requiring the programs to provide this to me. So I'm actually being able to kind of show you guys what's going on inside these programs. But there's a lot of uniqueness too. And I think that's the challenge when you promote, hire, and fire and all this stuff. You're trying to get all these teams built for, education and work and everything. Often there's just really nuanced things. It's not as easy as saying, oh, your GPA is this much. Oh, your GRE score is this high. You can't just do it mathematically. There are often things like how well do they work with the team? I've had very unique teams, diverse teams across my entire career. They have not been one nationality, one race, one gender. And it's been beneficial. So I like the diversity. I like the differences, but there needs to be cohesion in the team. There needs to be people that are willing to work together. Again, how do you measure this? it's really hard to do mathematically, guys. You can't just say like, oh, your getting along score is a 7 out of 10, and I don't know, your creativity is a 9 out of 10. However, you know, your conflict resolution is a 2 out of 10. Like, you can try to do it, and sure, you can attempt to do this, but these are sorts of things I don't think you can do mathematically. I think ways of preventing this. So, for example, when you accept students to grad programs, or you accept hires, or you do promotions and things, you need to document why you did it. So even when I interview people, for example, I have their resume and it has notes over the whole thing. And then I flip the resume over and take more notes, typically on the back, because I want people to understand like why I made the hire or why I did the promotion, right? They need to understand like, okay, these are intricate things. These are the skills I saw. These are the personality traits that I liked. This is why I think it's going to impact the team. This is how they're going to fit together. So this is a barrier to think about. This is something to be leery of. Again, it's challenging to get into the industry. Again, quants are viewed as dumb math people that just do math and have no idea what's going on in the finance realm. They don't understand the business. They have no personal skills. I see this sort of discrimination constantly from the business sides. In schools, academia, in the industry, I see it constantly, and I'm getting really sick and tired of it. And so I'm trying to figure out, again, how do you combat this? Part of this is education. If we can educate people and go, you know, quants are real people too, and they can learn traditional finance and see how it fits in with the modeling. And actually, a really good quant will understand the problem they're working on and understand the math. I think some of this is coming from a threat perspective. So the traditional finance side, I think, is somewhat nervous and afraid that quants are going to replace them. And in many ways, I think we can replace much of what's currently being done through automation. So a big thumbs up here for DeFi. I think DeFi is going to help push this, and I'll probably make another video on the benefits of DeFi because I talked about how I don't think it's going to stay around for very long, but there are benefits to it. Anyways, those are some of the hurdles. Those are some of the barriers. Career-wise, learning the soft skills as a quant is challenging. Learning the quant skills just to be a basic quant is extremely challenging. So there's a second barrier. So quant skills, qualitative skills, working with people, knowing when to roll over. Again, getting the jobs, getting the right education. These are like the biggest barriers and hurdles you're going to face. And again, working well with people, even when you're kind of getting screwed and people aren't treating you quite well, or they're discriminating against you because you're a quant or from where you're from. These are things that are just part of life. And as I've mentioned in many of my videos, and some other subscribers have pointed out too, in America here at least, if you don't like where you're working, you don't like the way you're treated, you can always go somewhere else. And that's the beauty of capitalism. You can go somewhere else. People are competing for top talent here. We're not filling quotas, or we should not be filling quotas. And that makes those that are qualified easier to jump around. And if you're just a crappy person, it's going to be hard to move around. You need to build out those other skill sets to make sure that you can kind of move around and have the same freedoms based on how good you are as a person and an individual. So anyways, those are my 2 cents. Those are the barriers. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And as always, until next time.